The government says America owes $38 trillion in debt. That number is plastered across news headlines, debated in Congress, and used to justify every budget fight. But here's what they're not telling you. The real debt is $175 trillion, not $38 trillion. $175 trillion, that's 4.6 times larger than the official number. And it's not a conspiracy theory, it's in the government's own financial report. They just bury it on page 247 where nobody reads. Here's how they hide it. The $38 trillion is debt held by the public, money the government borrowed by selling treasury bonds. But that completely ignores the $78-80 trillion in unfunded liabilities for Social Security and Medicare, promises made to 67 million current retirees and 178 million future retirees that have zero money set aside to pay. Add in unfunded federal pensions, $7 trillion, veterans benefits, $8 trillion, state and local government pension shortfalls, 5 years, $7 trillion, and other obligations, and you hit 140, 175 trillion in total liabilities depending on whose math you use. Think about that. The government's own financial report shows a negative net position of $118.2 trillion. If the U.S. government were a company, it would have been bankrupt decades ago. And this isn't theoretical future debt. Social Security goes insolvent by 2033, just 7 years away. Medicare hospital insurance goes broke by 2036. These aren't maybe problems. They're mathematical certainties, unless something radical changes. In this video, I'm exposing exactly what unfunded liabilities are and why they're hidden. How $78 trillion in Social Security Medicare promises will destroy retirees. Why the government's accounting is designed to deceive you when these programs go completely broke, and what this means for your investments and retirement. But before we expose the $175 trillion debt bomb that could destroy your retirement, if you want to understand how government accounting tricks affect your wealth and how to protect yourself from the coming fiscal crisis, subscribe to The Investor's Lens. Hit subscribe now. But there's one accounting concept that is by far the most important for understanding government finances, and 99% of Americans have never heard of it. It's unfunded liabilities. And it's how the government hides $137 trillion in obligations off the official balance sheet. Let me explain this simply. Imagine you promised your kids you'll pay for their college. The total cost will be $200,000 in 10 years, but you've only saved $50,000. The difference, $150,000, is your unfunded liability. It's money you owe but haven't set aside. The U.S. government does this on a massive scale. They promised 67 million current retirees and 178 million future retirees that they'll receive Social Security and Medicare benefits. The government calculated how much these promises will cost over the next 75 years, $78.3 trillion for Medicare and Social Security alone. But how much money has the government actually saved to pay these benefits? The Social Security Trust Fund has $2.5 trillion. That sounds like a lot until you realize it needs to pay out $26 trillion over 75 years. The shortfall? $23.5 trillion just for Social Security. Medicare is even worse. It needs $54.8 trillion over 75 years but has essentially nothing saved. The Medicare Trust Fund is projected to go broke by 2036, just 10 years from now. Combined, that's a $78.3 trillion unfunded liability for just these two programs. And this number comes directly from the government's own financial report of the United States, published annually by the Treasury Department. But wait, how can the government promise $78 trillion in benefits with almost no money saved? Because they're using pay-as-you-go accounting. Current workers' payroll taxes pay current retirees' benefits. It works as long as there are enough workers paying and the ratio of workers to retirees stays high. Benefits don't grow faster than tax revenue. All three of those conditions are breaking down. In 1960, there were 5.1 workers for every Social Security beneficiary. Today, it's 2.8 workers per beneficiary. By 2040, it'll be 2.3 workers. The math doesn't work anymore. And benefits are growing faster than tax revenue because people are living longer, collecting benefits for more years. Healthcare costs are rising faster than inflation. Baby boomers are retiring in massive numbers, 10,000 per day. Birth rates are falling, fewer future workers. This creates the unfunded liability, the gap between promises and reality. Now here's the critical point. The government doesn't count unfunded liabilities in the official 38 trillion national debt figure. They report them separately in a footnote on page 247 of a 300-page financial report that nobody reads. Why? Because if they included unfunded liabilities on the main balance sheet, the total would be $175 trillion depending on what you include. That would terrify bond markets, spike interest rates, and force immediate action. So they use a trick. They say debt only means money we've already borrowed, treasuries sold to investors. Future obligations that we've legally promised but haven't yet paid? Those don't count as debt. They're just unfunded liabilities. It's accounting fraud on a national scale. Any private company doing this would have executives in prison for securities fraud. But governments write their own accounting rules, so it's legal. The $175 trillion is real. It's coming due. And nobody in power wants to talk about it because the solutions are all politically toxic. Raise taxes dramatically, cut benefits drastically, or print money and destroy the currency. But the scale of Social Security and Medicare's insolvency is even more catastrophic. This next crisis is perhaps the most certain because unlike market crashes or recessions, this is pure mathematics. And the math says catastrophe is locked in. It's the Medicare and Social Security insolvency timeline. And every year we delay action makes the eventual crash worse. Here are the hard numbers from the 2025 Social Security and Medicare Trustees reports. Social Security Old Age and Survivors Insurance, OASI, goes insolvent 2033, 7 years away. Current trust fund, $2.5 trillion after 2033, can only pay 79% of promised benefits. That means 21% benefit cut for all 67 million current retirees. Medicare Hospital Insurance, Part A, goes insolvent 2036, 10 years away. After 2036, can only pay 89% of promised benefits, 11% benefit cut affecting every Medicare recipient. What does insolvency actually mean? It means the trust funds run out of money. At that point, by law, benefits must be cut to match incoming payroll tax revenue. There's no automatic borrowing authority. So in 2033, every Social Security recipient, including people who paid in for 40-plus years, will see their checks cut by 21% overnight unless Congress acts. A retiree getting $2,000 a month will drop to $1,580 a month. That's $5,040 per year in lost income. For the 67 million people currently on Social Security, this is a $340 billion annual benefit cut. And it's not a proposal, it's the law unless Congress changes it. Medicare insolvency in 2036 means hospitals and doctors will only receive 89% of what Medicare promises to pay. Many will stop accepting Medicare patients. Access to health care will collapse for 65-plus million elderly Americans. But here's what makes this exponentially worse. These insolvency dates assume the economy grows normally, unemployment stays low, and nothing goes wrong. If we have a recession, insolvency comes sooner because payroll tax revenue falls. The 2020 COVID recession moved up Social Security's insolvency date by 1 full year. A 2026-2027 recession could move it to 2030-2031. That's only 4 or 5 years away. And once insolvency hits, the political pressure will be enormous. Congress will face 3 choices. Option 1, Cut benefits, 21%. Political suicide. Seniors vote in huge numbers. No politician wants to cut their benefits. Option 2. Raise payroll taxes dramatically. The Social Security payroll tax is 12.4%, split between employee and employer. To close the $23.5 trillion gap, you'd need to raise it to about 16 to 17%. That's a massive tax increase on every worker. Option 3. General revenue transfers. Just use general tax revenue or borrow money to cover the shortfall. This is most likely politically, but it adds trillions to the official debt, spiking interest rates and risking a sovereign debt crisis. Option 3 is what they'll probably do, which means the $38 trillion official debt explodes to $50–60 trillion within a decade as Social Security shortfalls get added to regular borrowing. And that's just Social Security. Medicare is 4 times larger. The Medicare unfunded liability is $54.8 trillion versus Social Security's $23.5 trillion. When Medicare goes insolvent, the annual shortfall will be $500–700 billion per year. Adding $700 billion per year to the deficit means the national debt grows even faster. By 2040–2050, we could easily hit $80–100 trillion in official debt, with interest payments consuming 30–40% of the entire federal budget. At that point, the government can only pay for entitlements and interest. Everything else, defense, infrastructure, education, research, gets starved. Or they print money massively, creating double-digit inflation that destroys savings and wages. The $78 trillion unfunded liability isn't distant future theoretical debt. It starts hitting in 7 years with Social Security insolvency in 2033, and it accelerates from there. But the government has designed the accounting to hide this deliberately. Here's the deliberate deception in government accounting that allows them to report $38 trillion while owing $175 trillion. It's called cash accounting versus accrual accounting. And the difference is everything. Every public company in America must use accrual accounting. This means you count liabilities when you incur them, not when you pay them. If a company promises pensions to employees, they must show that liability on the balance sheet today, even though they'll pay it in 20 years. This is required by GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, and SEC rules. If Apple or Microsoft tried to hide future pension obligations off their balance sheet, executives would go to prison for fraud. But the U.S. government uses cash accounting for the national debt. They only count money they've already borrowed and owe to bondholders right now. Future obligations, even legally binding ones like Social Security, don't appear as debt. Here's the fraud. Social Security and Medicare aren't optional. They're law. If you paid payroll taxes for 40 years, the government legally owes you benefits. These are binding obligations, not discretionary future spending. But because the government writes its own accounting rules, they can say, "We'll worry about that when the bills come due." And they bury the real numbers in the financial report that gets zero media coverage. Let me show you how dishonest this is. The financial report itself admits the problem. Page 73 states, the government's total liabilities are $45.5 trillion. This does not include a Social Security and Medicare, which adds $78.3 trillion. So their own report says total liabilities are $123.8 trillion, 45.5T plus 78.3T. But when politicians talk about the national debt, they only mention the $38 trillion. It's like telling your spouse you have $10,000 in credit card debt while forgetting to mention the $250,000 mortgage. Technically true, but completely misleading. And here's why they do it: bond markets. If the official national debt was reported as $123.8 trillion, investors would demand much higher interest rates to lend money to an effectively insolvent government. Currently, the U.S. pays about 4% interest on its debt. If rates went to 6% because of insolvency fears, interest costs would be On 38T, $2.28 trillion year, current. On 124T, $7.44 trillion year, if unfunded liabilities counted. The entire federal budget is $6.8 trillion. Interest alone would exceed total revenue, $4.9 trillion. The government would be borrowing just to pay interest, a true death spiral. So they hide it. They use cash accounting for debt, but then publish the real accrual numbers in a report nobody reads. It's deliberate deception. The Government Accountability Office, GAO, has recommended for decades that the government switch to accrual accounting like private companies must use. Congress ignores them because truth would force action, and all actions, tax increases, benefit cuts, money printing, are politically toxic, so they kick the can. They tell the public debt is $38 trillion, while their own financial report shows it's really $124, $175 trillion, depending on what you include. Adding state, local, unfunded pensions gets you to 175T total. This accounting fraud works until it doesn't. When Social Security goes insolvent in 2033 and benefits get cut 21A, everyone will suddenly care about unfunded liabilities, but by then it'll be too late for gradual solutions. Only crisis-driven emergency measures will be possible. So what does this mean for your actual money? Here's who will actually pay for the $175 trillion liability, and it's almost certainly you if you're working age and middle class. The government has only 3 ways to cover unfunded liabilities: raise taxes, cut benefits, or print money. Politically, option 3, print money, is easiest, but it destroys your savings through inflation. Options 1 and 2 destroy your income and retirement. Let's do the math on what tax increases would be required. To close the $78.3 trillion Social Security Charter Medicare shortfall over 75 years requires an immediate 4.5% of GDP tax increase every year for 75 years, according to the financial report. U.S. GDP is $28 trillion. 4.5% of that is $1.26 trillion per year in new taxes. For context, all individual income taxes collected, $2.6 trillion, all corporate taxes, $600 billion, all payroll taxes, $1.7 trillion. So fixing Social Security Medicare alone requires raising 48% more tax revenue than we currently collect from individual income taxes. That's enormous. Who pays? The middle and upper middle class. Here's why. The bottom 50% of earners pay almost no federal income tax. The top 1% already pay 40% of all income taxes. You can't squeeze much more without them leaving the country or hiding income offshore. That leaves the middle. Households earning $75,000, $500,000. You make too much to avoid taxes, but not enough to hire fancy accountants and offshore structures. Likely tax increases: payroll tax from 12.4% to 16-17%. Your effective wage cut, 3 or 4%. Income tax, top bracket from 37% to 45 to 50%. Capital gains from 20% to 30-35%. Medicare tax from 2.9% to 40 and 5%. If you're earning $150,000, these increases would cost you $8,000, $12,000 per year. Over a 30-year career, that's $240,000, $160,000 in additional lifetime taxes. But that's only if they choose tax increases. If they choose money printing instead, most likely, your $150,000 salary buys what $100,000 buys today within 10-15 years. You're making the same nominal amount, but everything costs 50% more. Either way, the middle class pays through higher taxes or inflation-destroyed purchasing power. The wealthy protect themselves by owning assets, stocks, real estate, businesses that inflate with money supply. The poor get government benefits adjusted for inflation. The middle class holding cash savings and earning salaries gets crushed from both sides. And cutting benefits isn't politically feasible because seniors vote in huge numbers and younger people don't. Every politician knows anger seniors lose elections. So the most likely outcome is money printing inflation that slowly confiscates wealth from savers and wage earners while allowing politicians to claim they didn't cut benefits and didn't raise taxes explicitly. It's a stealth default through currency debasement, and the $175 trillion liability guarantees it happens. So what should you actually do? Here's exactly how to position before the $175 trillion debt bomb explodes. Strategy 1. Assume zero government benefits. If you're under 50, assume Social Security will be cut 25–40% by the time you retire. Don't count on it in retirement planning. Save as if it doesn't exist. If you're 50–65, maximize taking Social Security at 62 if possible before cuts hit in 2033. Strategy 2. Own hard assets. When governments face insolvency, they print money. Own assets that inflate with money supply stocks, especially dividend-paying, real estate, commodities, precious metals. Don't hold large cash positions or long-term bonds. Both get destroyed by inflation. Strategy 3. Prepare for higher taxes. Max out 401k, IRA contributions now while brackets are lower. The 37% top bracket will likely go to 45–50% within a decade. Consider Roth conversions while rates are still relatively low. Strategy 4. Geographic diversification. Don't keep 100% of wealth in dollar-denominated assets. Consider international assets, foreign property, or foreign currencies as hedges. Strategy 5. Increase income. The best protection against higher taxes is earning more. Focus on increasing income to stay ahead of tax increases and inflation. Strategy 6. Expect crisis. When Social Security goes insolvent in 2033, markets will panic. Hold 10–20% cash to buy quality assets during the crash. The $175 trillion can't be paid. It will be inflated away, defaulted on, or some combination. Position accordingly so we've exposed America's real $175 trillion debt versus the fake $38 trillion headline number. The unfunded liabilities accounting fraud, where the government hides $137 trillion off the main balance sheet, the $78.3 trillion Medicare and Social Security insolvency timeline, 2033 for Social Security, 7 years, 2036 for Medicare, 10 years, with automatic 21% benefit cuts when trust funds run dry. The cash versus accrual accounting deception that would put private executives in prison but is legal for governments. And exactly how this destroys middle-class wealth through either massive tax increases, 1.26T per year needed, or money printing inflation that steals purchasing power. These are the numbers buried on page 247 that politicians pray you never read. But here's something I didn't tell you at the start of this video. Everything I just shared is completely useless if you don't know which specific investments survive when governments start money printing to cover $175 trillion in liabilities, which countries' bonds are safe havens, and exactly when to shift from defensive to offensive positioning. Without this timing and allocation knowledge, you'll be holding the wrong assets when the crisis hits. Comment under this video and I will reveal the exact portfolio allocation for surviving government insolvency and the 3 signals that tell you when the debt crisis goes from slow burn to explosion. I'll see you in the next one.